Good. Excellent.
We're
How are
early,
you?
buddy. We're 20
Yeah.
seconds early, pal.
20 seconds ahead of the curve. That feels good. 20 seconds to breathe. That's often, that's often the best luxury part of the day, isn't it? When you've got a busy business to run. So
Absolutely.
we're
Yeah.
talking Amazon International today, global expansion. Very
Mhm.
interesting topic area to talk about. Often evokes quite strong, yeah, everyone should do it, or nah, that's just too much hassle in reality. And I think hopefully we can give a bit of a more nuanced, opinion on that today.
Going global. Yeah, this is a great one. I'm excited about it. I'm the humble learner in this context, and you are the guru that we're going to learn
Don't
from.
know
Or
about
come
guru. I
on,
mean,
you
I've
know what I
certainly
mean. Like
made quite a few
you're the
mistakes in this area,
teacher.
and yeah,
You're the
I know
teacher.
some stuff about this stuff. Yeah.
Well, if you're joining us live as we do this session of the podcast, give us a like, love, comment in Facebook or wherever you're listening or watching from, YouTube, Facebook groups, whatever. We'd love to have you join us here for the next little bit. We're going to record at least one podcast episode, maybe two. And we'd love to have you jump in, say hello, let us know where you're listening from, give us a like, love, comment. And if you have questions about taking your Amazon business global, then we'd love to have you drop it in the comments underneath this video and we'll weave it in the conversation. If you're watching via replay, then we're honored that you're checking it out. We're going to dive into a great topic today for you in the video, and we'd love to be have this be a resource for you. So, Michael, any other pre-roll
The
setup
only thing,
combo?
not really. The only thing I would say is I'm just looking at the on a list that I've got from the podcast that I've done in the 10K Collective on this topic over the last 2 or 3 years, and I have frightening amounts of contacts and resources. So all I would say is if you're struggling with a particular issue to deal with, whether it's to do with international payments, freight, tax,
Mhm.
translations, it's not about me knowing all the answers, but I know a person who does. So just hit me up in the comments
Yeah.
or send me a PM. I'd be delighted to put you in touch with one of our many partners because I was just thinking, yeah, I know lots of people who help with these areas.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
do use me as a resource.
Love it. Okay, well, let's get down to business here. Let's record the podcast, and again, feel free to pop comments in as you're listening with us. So, Michael, take it away, man. I think you're doing the intro.
Yeah. The growth of e-commerce has been very much a global story over the last 10 to 15 years, and the acceleration of that trend under COVID has also been a very global thing as well. Amazon's obviously been a huge part of that, as everyone knows, but many, if not most, e-commerce businesses end up stuck selling in one or two possible marketplaces, and they could be, depending on their business, missing out on great opportunity, not just for more sales, but of course more profits. So today we're going to explore whether you should be considering expanding internationally with your business, and if that is the case, how to go about that process to add profits and ultimately make your business more valuable.
Love it, man. What a topic. I'm
Yeah,
excited about this one.
literally global in scope. So it's big.
This is big. I'm excited about this one because we have the honor of having several communities that we help run mastermind groups for replens selling, and also we work one on one with people who have large Amazon accounts in the U.S. primarily, but then sometimes do struggle with the question of going global and whether it's the right move or not.
Mm.
And so I think of them as I think about this, and I'm eager for them to hear this episode and learn about this whole issue of going global, how best to achieve it. I've already seen the outline. You've got tons of tips and ideas here, and really great information that we're going to share in this conversation. So why don't you just frame it for us? Like, how big do you think this opportunity is? What's your take on the opportunity for U.S. sellers? I guess I'm thinking of U.S. Amazon sellers to go global. I mean, maybe your context is EU sellers to go global, but let's talk about the scope and the opportunity here.
Well, I mean, it really depends on your individual business, the first thing I would say, but I've got a couple of stories. I mean, one of the clients we have is based in the UK, so it is a bit of an EU sort of European
Hmm.
focused. I simply sort of politely bullied him for the first 3 months of his membership for the mastermind in about autumn 2017. And they were already doing, I don't know what, 3 million US, 4 million US a year. and persuaded them to go into Germany, which was for them at that particular point. This is not the advice I would give now, but at that particular point in history, with the relationship between the UK and EU, was a very easy move. And when he left the mastermind and he moved on to 8 figures, a bit bigger than we can serve at the moment, he said to me, well, thanks to you, we've probably made in US dollar terms about $750,000 in profit alone just from that move. So, that was a sweet move. So I'm not saying it's always as easy as that, but it can really just be a whole chunk more sales and profits that you bolt onto an existing business. So
it's interesting. I guess as you explain it that way, the other thing that I do have experience with is sometimes we'll have Amazon sellers, or frequently have Amazon sellers, come to Kyle and I, and they come to us with the desire to be omni-channel and to move from just Amazon US, Amazon.com selling, to either selling on Shopify or Walmart, or expanding in other sales channels. And their primary motivation is fear, I guess you could say, in a way. I mean, it all boils down to either greed or fear sometimes for this, how that is. But I think sometimes they think to themselves, oh, I'm in the US Amazon, Amazon.com, and I'm just, doing great. But they could shut me down, or something could go wrong, or this could get derailed somehow. I don't know what I don't know, but I know that this is great and I don't want it to stop. So one mitigation of that fear or concern is to go omni-channel. And I guess I'd be interested in your take. Do you see multiple Amazon markets as an omni-channel strategy? Or would you, in a way, it's sort of a sub omni-channel approach where you're going to be omni-channel all inside the Amazon ecosystem. But be open to your thoughts on that, and whether you see this as a safety and risk mitigation.
Well, I definitely have some thoughts on that. Yes, as I remember, I used to have a Russian piano teacher. I used to say, "Have you got any advice?" And he used to go, "Ho ho ho, we have saying about this." And basically, yeah, I have a lot of thoughts, as you know me. Well, broadly speaking, so let's deal with the Amazon risk thing specifically, because there are multiple other things that I've got in our outline that we'll cover in terms of risks diversification. But one of the things that you're not going to do, frankly, if you expand to Amazon UK, for example, even if you use a different email address, they're not stupid people. They know you're linked. And if you mess up your US Amazon account and you break the policies, or you have a suspension over certain reasons, that it could be putting your UK or European Amazon accounts at risk. So the answer to the risk thing, Amazon risk, suspension risk, I guess you probably will need to have off Amazon channels if that's really your reason for doing it. And a very valid reason it is too. So I guess international expansion via Amazon doesn't particularly, in my mind, mitigate that risk enough. Somewhat. I do know people who've had, for example, Italian Amazon accounts suspended whilst the rest of their accounts were fine, including the US. So that it does mitigate it to a degree.
So the de-risking, not so much. So then we shift to the reward instead of the risk opportunity. So this is more about reward than it is about risk mitigation.
Yeah, well, a nuance to that. I'm saying specifically the Amazon risk isn't de-risked, but there are multiple risks that you need to think about. If you only have one currency you sell in, then it seems like there's no problem until China and the US decide that they're going to completely decouple their currencies, and suddenly your supplier cost relative to the US market shoots up. Then there's currency risk, for example, and there are different risks we can evaluate. So in that case, it is definitely a hedge against those risks. So awesome. It does help. Yeah.
Okay, so now let's frame this for people who sell in different types of business models. So obviously you're a trainer in the private label field, but we also have people who are doing arbitrage and replens selling strategy. We have people in our community who are wholesale sellers who just simply buy, through wholesale accounts and then resell on Amazon. Is this opportunity to go global, do you think, limited just to private label, or how would you see those other business models?
Absolutely not limited. I'm not an expert in those business models, but I am, for example, a couple of examples. I'm setting up my own retail arbitrage business, partly just so I can see. I believe that it's an opportunity that makes a lot more sense for a big percentage of the listeners and people that are following me. And I want to be able to advise them from a point of view of experience. And I'm going to go straight for the US because I have no particular interest in being exposed to more of the UK government's, government policies and particular challenges we have in the UK. So for me, the US looks like a more attractive opportunity, particularly for retail arbitrage, because it's a big country. So that the ability to get the goods you want in your local shops is lower. And therefore, there's more of an opportunity to get it on Amazon than it would be in the UK, for example. So it comes down to specifics sometimes. So that's one example. Another example, if you are UK based, for example, you might want to contact some US based wholesalers, people not wholesalers, but people who sell at wholesale, because they may be delighted to use you as an expansion channel internationally. But equally, if you already have relationships with some wholesalers and you can be their international expansion channel and take care of that for them, a lot of them would be very, very interested in that conversation. It may be an aspiration they've had for a long time, but they've never got around to it for the same reasons you do, which is you perceive it as hassle. But if you can focus on the Amazon hassle, that's a lot more specific than them going international expansion, rabbit in the headlights moment. We have no idea. So if you can solve a problem for people, you can always make money, I think.
Yeah, I love that. I guess the other person that comes to mind is our friend Barrington McIntosh, who sells from the Caribbean into the U.S. market, because people in the Caribbean, people who are from the Caribbean who live in the U.S. like the foods of the Caribbean, of course, the regional foods, and so he has a great business just simply buying those types of items, sending them into the Amazon.com, U.S. marketplace, and the Caribbean, natives love to purchase that stuff if they live in Minnesota or Seattle or wherever, and it makes it easy and convenient for them. And so I guess that's an international approach and strategy that just is simple arbitrage. And so I think that's an interesting angle, and I suppose that would be true of any international any country, that there are uniquenesses there that their own countrymen or citizens abroad would appreciate you being the supplier for.
Yes, I've heard that people have done quite well in Germany, for example, supplying things like Marmite and things that you can't easily get there. So that's even like in physical retail stores. So yeah, there's always opportunities like that. Those are perhaps more specialist, but yeah, more generally, if once you take the cap off your thinking and just go, right, why don't we consider our next opportunities, look a bit more broadly, literally globally, you may stumble across opportunities that work for your particular business model. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, let's get the big stuff off the table first.
Yeah.
What is the biggest mistake you see people make when they start to endeavor into such efforts?
So two opposite errors, really. And I suppose, we can hopefully synthesize a middle path. The first one is people never get round to it for two reasons. One is they exaggerate the problems in their mind. For example, I don't speak Japanese and I can't read that. They have 3 alphabets, and that is complicated. But I know a person who deals with that. So actually, it is probably not as complicated as trying to develop a brand new product line, which for me is like sweating blood. I mean, it's really hard work. And I don't know many people who don't find it hard work. Some people like it, but find it hard work, and some people like myself find it hard work and aren't that attracted. So that's the first thing. And the other reason for not getting around to it, which is the kind of first error, subset of the first error, is you're too busy, even though you believe in the opportunity. And in that case, there's only 24 hours in the day, and so you have to decide whether you're going to carve some time out, get the routine operations off your plate to a degree where you can work on this. And actually, that's a more broad strategic problem, isn't it? If you're too busy to follow up what look like genuine, properly qualified opportunities, to change how you approach your operations.
And
So
what does that change? That's the Eliyahu Goldrate, which is the theory of constraints, which is in his book, The Goal. And he asks 3 questions: what to change to, and how to make the change. Those 3 questions drive a ton of optimization in businesses. And if you're too busy to take advantage of doubling your total sales or doubling your profit by expanding into an international market, just as a theoretical, future outcome, then it probably means maybe that you're the technician in your business and you haven't figured out how to hire team members who can do the technical components, so you can be on the cutting edge of new growth opportunity. So team building quickly becomes, I think, a big challenge for scaling e-commerce operations, where you've got something working, you've scaled it, you've liberated yourself, maybe you're financially free now, you've got a real viable business, but you need to build a real team if you're going to scale to greater outcomes. And so I think that's part of it that I see, I think, as a challenge as well. But then it's like, how do you do that? How do you find resources or virtual team members or whatever that help you do that kind of step?
Well, I've got lots of useful resources for listeners there, but I think one thing, to your point, to sort of synthesize those problems, I suppose if you feel like it's complicated, and sometimes it genuinely is, But if you think how, not who, like how do I solve that? Then of course you're going to get overwhelmed, because the answer is going to be, well, you're going to add 20 hours a week to your workload. And if you're working 80-hour weeks, that's not possible. But if you think who, not how, there are people out there who solve this stuff for decades, who could do it for you. And that's the key for me, is you are going to have some management time. And as you said, you're going to have to make sure you get yourself out of the operations and not be the technician. I absolutely agree with that. But equally, the amount of time you should need to manage it or to sort of push it shouldn't be all of the man hours needed. It should be the management man hours needed, because the rest should be outsourced to experts, and they're out there and they will do the job for you. It's my experience.
Love it. And of course, the Who Not How's Dan Sullivan's recent book.
Yeah, of course,
that phrase prompted in their conversations, I think, with who was it? Gosh, it slips my mind, but I'll think of it in a minute. But the idea is you want to be who'd up, and you want to focus on your, find your who, not your how. And
exactly.
So I think that's the idea. Yeah, I love that. I think that's really valuable advice. Yeah.
So the second big area of error is the opposite, really. It's which people go, oh, wow, especially when they're based in the UK, and people still have that mentality, even though Brexit has changed absolutely everything. So if you're a UK-based seller, don't assume that things are just the same in 2021 as they were last year, because they are violently different, I can tell you. So, but the natural thing is, oh, I could sell in Germany. Well, why don't I sell in France and Spain and Italy? Well, you suddenly added a bunch of languages, customer support, different cultures, different types of regulations, but you might sell 2 units a week of something in Spain, and then you've added a ton of complexity without the commensurate opportunity side. So that's one of the things that I see people doing quite often as well. That's kind of an error of commission, not omission. So it's a more positive, more entrepreneurial error to make, is to overexpand. But nevertheless, that's not a great thing to do either. So I just advocate just doing two things, which is, don't assume it's too hard, but don't assume that you should just do everything either. Just assume that you can do it, evaluate the opportunities, and then pick your fights and go for the big wins. And that's the way forward, in my opinion.
Okay, love it. I love it. Okay, so if somebody's thinking, should I do this? Maybe. Why don't you give us your best rundown of the reasons why international expansion is a good idea for people to look into?
Sure. Well, so one very, very simple thing is that whenever people are private labeling, and this doesn't apply quite in the same way to resellers, but it might apply to those who are sourcing wholesale, is that if you have to get 1,000 units done as a minimum run, or 2,000, whatever it is, of a custom product, particularly even private label products, quite often what you'll say is, okay, so in China, I need to get 1,000 units done. But if I go to the US and look at my sales figures, I can only shift realistically 500 every 3 months, and therefore you're going to have a lot of stock hanging around, tying your capital up. One solution would be to, and this is a very common thing, that you look at what you could shift in Canada as well, and then in Germany and UK, for example, and it all adds up to a sort of an additional, so maybe double the number of units. So suddenly you can make an order and shift that stock into cash within 3 months, and therefore you're more efficient, you're turning your cash over quicker. So you're basically using the same amount of cash in stock, all things being equal. This is a simplistic way of putting it, and sending it around the globe, and you're turning it back to cash more quickly. So you should, if you get it right, not really greatly increase your working capital requirements, but you can almost double your sales, which is a beautiful thing. And this is a very powerful reason to do it. I think that's probably my number one reason to do it. The MOQ versus unit sales thing.
Yeah. What else?
Anything that increases cash flow, more revenue and more profit. I mean, it's quite simple. Now, they don't automatically translate, right? So you could be a UK-based seller. You look at the US, you see stars in your eyes, and you think, wow, somebody's doing $1 million a month in this market. Well, okay, but if it's hyper competitive, you won't necessarily make profit. So you need to nuance that, but that's certainly an opportunity. Diversifying global risks. We talked about risk diversification. To some degree, you can mitigate Amazon suspension risk for an individual country account. So that is kind of half mitigated. But currency exchange risk is one thing. If the Chinese and US dollar relationship changes violently, then that could be really hit you. Whereas if you're selling to Europe and that hasn't changed, then you'll have the same profits you had before. The second thing is diversifying geopolitical risk, which is a very real thing. China and the US are kind of on collision course for who's the top dog in the world. And that means, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, it is what it is. that there are big old tariffs now, of course, importing from China to US, whereas you won't have any change really between China and the EU for the last decade in terms of the relationship. The other obvious one is Brexit. If you were selling into Germany last year from the UK, no problem, making lots of money. This year, it's an absolute nightmare. Whereas if you're selling to the US, that won't have changed.
Yeah.
So that's another thing you mitigate against. And then other risks as well, which
yeah.
are quite random. So, for example, during the COVID time, Kevin Sanderson, my friend who sells everywhere in the world, who I know you've met as well and spoken with, he was selling primarily in the US, but he was also selling in Europe, which was maybe a third of his sales. And at one point, the US kind of shut down most of the Amazon warehouses that he was fulfilling from, and Europe just kind of saved his bacon because that kept ticking at that point. So sometimes you don't even know what you're going to protect against, but having diversification geographically can really help there.
I'll add something to your list as I'm listening to that. The other incredible opportunity as a reason to expand is because frequently for each of us in our categories, we're head to head against other competitors. And the question is, where are you and where are they? And it is a little bit of a chess game or checkers. You got spots on the board that you are or aren't that are strong or weak. And they have spots on the board where they're strong and where you're weak. And you're constantly thinking through, where are they? Where am I? Are they first? Am I first? Or, ideally. If you have an opportunity to go into a space that is not occupied by a competitor, these frequently become winner take most opportunities. If you install yourself as the number one option in any product niche, in the bestseller ranks on these marketplaces or platforms, it becomes increasingly difficult to uninstall you. And so that's the name of the game in many of these marketplaces, is start when they're small, start when no one cares, start when no one understands who they are, what they do. And as they scale, you scale, and you've installed yourself in a prime spot over time. It's almost like setting up shop in a little town that's a nowhere town that the major railroad or freeway gets installed by. And then over time, as the traffic grows and grows and grows, you do more and more well. And your competitor only wishes they would have known about that opportunity of the year before you did.
Yeah,
and it is a little bit of a land grab. Sometimes it feels like, I think so.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think the main thing is nobody has a 2020 vision on the future, but you need to look at the sort of drivers of it. I mean, population size is one, isn't it? But sometimes there are kind of underloved markets. I mean, I think, for example, if I were US based, then Canada would be something I would be considering a bit stronger than most. I think my understanding is that sort of 80% of Canadians live within 100 miles of the US border. I mean, so it's not, it's a huge country, but most of it isn't going to be, where you're trying to fulfill to. So, there are some obviously underloved things. Another one for me is Japan. I mean, yes, there are linguistic problems which are very solvable, but actually, if you're making stuff in China and selling it over to the UK or the US, which nobody thinks twice about doing normally, it's pretty tricky right now. The shipping time on a boat from most Chinese East Coast to Japan is 2 weeks. It's so quick, and that takes out a lot of the horrendous nail biting of, is my shipment going to take 3 or possibly 4 months now? And people don't consider it because there's a bit of a cultural barrier, and I get that, but compared to the horrendousness of shipping stuff from China to US, yeah, exactly. I mean, I just think that's underloved, and that's an opportunity, for example.
So if people have heard the opportunity exists and they aren't doing it right now, they're either not doing it because they're really new and they haven't gotten to that valuable thing, because there are other more valuable things that they're doing. They're just they may be scaling in their own country first, and so it's just on their list but not done yet. But the other reason people might not have done it is because, to your previous point, they've over exaggerated the concerns or complexities or problems in their mind. Maybe they've made a monster out of it. But there are realities that are of complexity and problematic issues to solve if you're going to go international. So what do you see as those real big challenges and the downsides associated with expanding internationally?
Yeah, I would say the first thing is additional complexity. It's not just your management time, but if you're trying to sell the business on, if you're thinking big big picture, longer term, if you're trying to sell on to an aggregator or anyone else, it's going to be their management time. And if they're intelligent, and some people don't think this through and will just buy anything, but if they're the longer people get the reality of integrating Amazon businesses with multiple countries involved, multiple marketplaces, the more they're going to be aware of the fact that they should think about this. So over time, if you try and sell an overly complex business relative to the opportunity, in that case, the profit or the value of the business, then you'll struggle. So you've got to weigh that up. There will be more money to spend on tax compliance, which is not the same as the tax itself. Compliance meaning hiring tax experts, registering with different companies, putting in reports, VAT, sales tax, whatever it is. You might potentially need to spend more money and focus as well, mental focus on other forms of compliance. For example, if you're selling stuff that is FDA approved, what is the European Union equivalent, and things like that as well. You're going to need to set up new relationships in different countries or sort of entities. I suppose you sometimes can treat the EU as a whole, sometimes not. Tax can get complicated, of course. You've got stock management complications because you need to know where your stock for product line X is. You might have 1,000 units being made in a factory in China, 500 on the water towards the US, 200 in the US FC, etc. Right? So you got multiple places where stock can end up. So you've got to be on top of that. And capital allocation as well. If you're really expanding aggressively internationally, you may not be expanding in the sense of launching new product lines. You might be taking existing product lines and allocating the capital to stock and international expansion costs. So it is really quite a big decision, which is why I'm trying to flag this up as a nuanced discussion rather than just, yes, it's amazing, or no, it's terrible.
No, it's great. And I think you're wise to set it up this way, as, consider the realities of the challenges, but also the opportunity. And I think I guess timing wise, as we record this, it's the end of October, early November. I think timing wise, I would just encourage people to think, okay, this year is obviously just all about Black Friday, Cyber Monday, end of year sales. But could I set this up for, next year? Could this be my big thing for next year that really takes my business to the next level? I think that, so timing wise, in terms of the calendar right now, I think this makes a lot of sense too for people who are listening to this in the moment. So we've got the pros, we've got the cons. What are the decision-making steps that you would recommend people kind of put together to really make this decision as to whether they should do this or not?
Well, following your lead, Jason, I've got a 10-step process. So hopefully something people can hang on to. So the first step is really to tie it to your bigger goals. I mean, two things really. I mean, the biggest goal is probably the lifetime of the business insofar as you own it. It doesn't mean the lifetime of your business if you sell it on somebody else and it becomes a global brand for 20 years. But what's your exit plan? What is the simplest path to a valuable exit? As I said before, you've got to think about adding value versus adding complexity. Complexity broadly is less attractive because it means management time and risk for whoever takes the business on. And by the way, it's true for you while you own it in the meantime, but also, value. I mean, so you've just got to weigh that up. As I said before, if you start adding all the European marketplaces, for example, and all the complexity that comes with that, and you have marginal additions from three of them, that does not make sense. So you've got to think about, if you're planning to sell your business, how attractive is this going to make your business, more or less attractive, and will it add to the value?
Big goals.
And then
Yeah.
linked to that is your medium-term goals. What's the simplest path to profit? Sometimes it could be just produce more product lines for the same marketplace. If you're really good at product development, I mean, personally, I feel it's like pulling teeth. Some people find that easier and find international expansion more stressful. So that's a bit of a nuance. But either which way, you've got to tie it to your big goals. Otherwise, you're just adding stuff randomly, and it's very easy to do. Amazon will encourage you every 5 seconds to add more marketplaces. But you need to be very mindful about whether it makes strategic sense for you and your business.
Okay. What's the second step?
Second step, consider alternatives. So really, you're looking at allocation of time and money and effort to new product lines versus new sales channels. Those are, broadly speaking, how you're going to increase revenue. I mean, okay, you should be, caveat, we've talked before about fine-tuning your conversion rates and everything else to maximize profit from existing revenue. So I'm not suggesting you skip that, but assuming you've done that, dangerous assumption, but I have to make it. It's basically new product lines versus new sales channels. So you got product A, it's selling in the USA, it's selling like hotcakes. Okay, what are you going to do next with the limited capital and money you've got available? What's the next step? Is it going to be to go and get related products made, or are you going to go into the UK with it and maybe Germany as well? Obviously, you can have a strategic plan to do both. But I would strongly advise against doing both at the same time, because normally you're bitten off more than you can chew, in my experience with that one.
Yeah, this is interesting because I think this is where it really becomes an omni-channel conversation. We've had this conversation many, many times with the clients that we work with, which is you've got something nailed right now. You're on lockdown with, your current Amazon US selling process, or you've got that set up and you've got Shopify set up. And the question is, what's next? And the international Amazon frequently turns into just an alternate channel that they evaluate against Walmart or other omni-channel selling opportunities. And so I think that's an interesting thing to look at because you probably, I don't know what your opinion is, but I would think you'd want to take these channel exercises sequentially, one at a time, do one right, get it going, refine it, and then when you've got the mental, emotional, financial team bandwidth to take on a new channel, you just go, you go into the next one, get it sorted, and then keep going from there and become an omni-channel seller over time in that way, rather
Yeah.
than dabbling in 3 or 4 channels at the same time and have a giant bowl of spaghetti business mess. The problem, right? Is that
I would absolutely agree with that. I
yeah.
mean, I suppose the bowl of spaghetti mess is a very visceral way of putting what I was trying to say. The classic mistake I see, people kind of just chuck everything on Amazon. They go omni-channel just because you can. Like if you're based in North America, it's not a casual stuff to send inventory to Canada because it's so huge, or to Mexico because it's a very different type of market. But in Europe, it's very tempting to just go, oh, let's just throw everything in there. And you're right,
Yeah.
that's messy, and I absolutely 100% back you up on that.
Yeah.
One channel at a time,
Yeah.
get it right, refine it. And by the way, try it out first, and you may
Mhm.
discover that it's not for you. I would say allow for that. And the assumption we always make as entrepreneurs is, oh, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, as opposed to, let's be humble. I'm going to try this. If it works, I'm going to double down on it. But if it
Mhm.
doesn't work, I'm going to do something else. So
Yeah.
allowing for that as well
Yeah.
is part of reality, isn't it? I think.
Yeah, totally right. And I guess the international Amazon expansion is a known quantity in terms of the backend systems and all that. I mean,
Yeah.
relatively speaking, if you're selling on one Amazon platform, you kind of conceptualize how you could move laterally to other countries.
Yes.
Whereas if you compare it to selling on eBay or Walmart and you've never done that before, it's a whole different animal. Um, so yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. So what's the next step? What's the third step?
So the third step, really, having decided whether it makes sense for your strategic plans and looking at basically, the trade-offs, as you said, are you going to do Walmart.com in the US versus, Amazon Europe or something, is really, okay, evaluate the size of the opportunity. So that my hint is very simple, but important, which is start with the biggest markets first. So US is, if you're UK based, always this sort of shining city on the hill. I'm not quite sure that a lot of the time that it's really the opportunity it looks like, because
That's such a nice comment
I
about the
don't know
U.S.
where
right
that
now.
comes from, but
We're a shining city on a
city
hill.
on the hill.
Thank
Well, it
you,
looks so like
British
it's so
person.
shiny.
That's so great.
They big sales numbers, and they raving consumers, they
Yeah,
buy everything. But
yeah.
you've got to think about the fact that if you go into a really big market, it's going to have a very big working capital requirement. That's the first thing. And the second thing, in the US, compared to most other marketplaces in the world, on Amazon, but it's true off Amazon, I guess, to a large degree, is just so much bigger that the competition is really fierce. So you need to know what it is you're doing. Having said that, sometimes you can niche right down in the US and make a real business out of something that would be just too small a niche in any other
Hmm.
marketplace. So
Yeah.
the US is a bit of a special case because of its size. But I would say if you're UK or US based, Germany, UK, if you're US based, is an obvious one, and Japan, those are all, Germany is the second
Hmm.
biggest Amazon marketplace by some margin. And then UK and Japan always seem to be pretty similar sizes.
Okay.
So they're obvious opportunities.
So
And
your rank order would be U.S., Germany, UK, Japan. So those
yeah,
are the top four.
yeah, kind of in terms of size. I mean, if I had to really pick three to really focus on, if you're US based and you're not selling UK yet, it's the obvious place to look. But they're really the underloved, because of the perceived barriers to entry, where, to your point of trying to dominate before everyone else has got in there, Germany and Japan is still. Germany has got quite a few American sellers, but not as many percentage wise as the UK for sure. And Japan is just underloved by US
Yeah.
sellers. And I
Yeah.
understand why, because it's a kind of a bit of a black box. You can't use the usual research tools.
Yeah.
For me, that's a great thing. I
Yeah.
love that because you haven't got the competition. And I think the competition is a bigger problem to you than some logistical challenge. I mean, the
Yeah.
competition is always going to be eating at your margins. Whereas once you've jumped over a barrier, you're the other side of it.
Yeah.
So for me, I mean, if I had to pick one single underloved opportunity, it's Japan, really.
It's
Um,
interesting you say that. Kyle Hamer, my business partner for our consulting work, says that frequently to people, and he sells with his brands in Japan, and he walks people through that for the same reason, which is, you kind of go where people aren't, where your competitors aren't, and yeah, so it's interesting. He feels the same way. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to hear that. But yeah, it makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, depends what you think the problem is. An operational problem is something you can solve, whereas competition is out of your control, isn't it? And likely to increase. If the competition finds something easy now, it's going to
Yeah.
get worse over the next 12 months.
Yep.
A couple of sort of bonuses. If you're based in the USA, I would definitely consider Canada. I'm not based in the US, so I've not really, done that. It's slightly harder if you're UK based, but there's a bunch of well well-heeled consumers that probably have quite similar habits to US citizens within a stone's throw of the US border. If
Yeah.
you're already selling the EU, particularly if you're selling in Germany, I would definitely add on France, Italy, Spain to
Hmm.
that. I wouldn't just randomly add them on there if you're not already selling in Germany,
Yeah.
because to the points we made earlier, people get excited about Australia, Dubai, Singapore, UAE, whatever. I've never really come across anyone who's done anything there that's excited them or me, really. So I wouldn't get too distracted by those at this stage in the game, from what I've
Okay.
seen.
What's number 4?
Number 4 is really pick your fight. So once you've looked at this, to your point, go into one more market. Don't try and do lots at the same time, right? So we've already really talked about that, but it's really important. And the European Union, even if you're based in the EU, is not a unified thing. Just like in the States,
Yeah.
it turns
Yeah.
out that they're really different on sales tax. There are different VAT rates. There are different rules. France likes to be protectionist. Spain seems to be complicating things right now. So there's always some kind of nuance going on. So pick one country, pick one marketplace, and hammer that at that until you've either decided it's not for us or it's
Hmm.
working. We've refined it. We've stabilized it.
Yep. Okay. Step 5.
Evaluate barriers to entry, which is
Mm,
the scary bit.
mm,
Number one is tax, probably. You're even kind of conceptually, Americans freak out about VAT just as we in the UK or Europe freak out about sales tax, because it's just not something in our daily experience. And the answer to that is just it's not. It's a who, not how thing. And please, can I just beg anyone listening, don't go on a Freeze Facebook group and ask for tax advice. That's not a wise idea. It's either going to be completely wrong, or it's going to be completely wrong but looks plausible and you follow it, which is even worse. Just go and pay for some professional advice
yeah.
and think
Yeah.
it through. Really professional. If you're talking sales tax, really think it through with a professional, because it's a complicated area. The second thing is you got to evaluate freight. That's normally pretty much of a commodity, but if you're shipping from the UK to EU, you really want to make sure that we have um, some real experts on board,
Yeah.
because there's a lot
Yeah.
of people who think they know how to do it.
Hmm.
Third one is translation and localization of listings and the
Hmm.
linguistic side, and the fourth one is customer service.
Hmm.
In my
Okay.
opinion, I've got a language background, so maybe I'm biased, but I think people make too much of that. You can hire that fairly easily. That is
Hmm.
not too painful.
Okay.
People think that's a big deal. I don't think it is, personally.
One that's not on your list that I would be interested to hear your thought on, which I've heard Kyle say before, is legal entity. Do you need a business itself in Germany or a business set up in whatever country? Yeah.
It's a good question. I mean, that's really one for the lawyers to
Okay.
mull over, I suppose. I would
Yeah.
say my experience with, if you're UK based and you want to sell in America, you don't probably need a US entity. And I would argue that you probably do not want to be getting a US entity, because California, particularly, but other states as well, are starting to come after people for all kinds of taxes I had never heard of in my life. And I'm not sure I'd want to be overexposed to that, to be honest. So most of the time, UK entities seem to work
Yeah.
internationally quite well.
Yeah.
America has a kind of alphabet soup of legal entities, so I'm
Hmm.
not even going to go into that.
Okay. Yeah.
But maybe I think that's less likely to be the case than you might think. But you'd have to talk to a lawyer, I
Yeah.
guess.
Okay. What's step 6?
Contact or find partners. So this is the who, not how piece. What existing partnerships do you have to solve issues already, and how quickly can you find help? And as I said, just make the offer to anyone listening. Do hit me up on PM or email me if you've got a specific issue around tax, freight, whatever. Not because I'm an expert, I am not, but I know a lot of people who are
Yeah.
as well. So that's really quite straightforward. But the
Yeah.
quality of your partners is critical. They need to know their business, because without them, the whole thing falls apart. With great people, you just phone them, they solve the problem, or email them or whatever, and then you move on.
I think that there's a sub thread though underneath that one that is a little bit of a tell for the quality of your business, which is, as soon as you start to say, I need a partner for this, I need a partner for that, you start to see the dollar signs, uh, ching, 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 come in, and you're thinking, how do I pay for all of these partners to help me run this abroad? And it immediately comes back to the economics of your business, the quality of your business, whether you've got unit margin, and whether you've got a business that really is scalable. And this is, one of the reasons why the businesses that have fantastic unit economics and real value kind of inherit for you as the owner are much more scalable than ones where you're eking out a real low margin. So obviously this, find partners sounds simple if you've got margin. And if you don't, and you've just obliterated all of your margin through all your partners, and all you're doing is moving units that have no profit for you,
Yeah.
then you've created a system that has eliminated profit
Yeah.
because you've expanded it too far with expenses that were too high based
Yeah.
on your unit economics, I guess is my thinking there.
100% right. And yes, everything you said is very, very true. And I suppose the first thing I would say is, yeah, if your unit economics are that bad, then you have a bigger problem. This is just a symptom of that, as exactly like you said. And the other thing is, um, to your point of, putting one channel at a time and assuming it will work, multiple channel expansion, assuming it will work is a great way to add to your expenses without adding to your revenue commensurately. And as you say, give all your profit to your current
Yeah.
partners. And
Yeah.
that's very easy to do. By the way,
Yeah.
the partner who's taking the biggest profit, partner in the broader sense, you're one of those little creatures swimming around a shark, is Amazon. Let's not kid ourselves. But also freight forwarders right now are obviously going to take a big percentage because freight's super expensive. And yeah, you
Yeah.
absolutely have to have an evaluation stage before you scale it, and that's really critical to build in. So that's one of my steps.
Oh, there you go. Okay, step 7.
Step 7. So check your resources against requirements. So obviously, if you have to, pay for a lawyer and you have to do a legal entity, by the way, quite likely you don't, but, VAT registration, VAT compliance, whatever it is, okay, go and talk to people and evaluate, get a budget together. What would it cost? And then, add up the numbers. And to your point, will your business support this? The answer may well be no, which is fine. That doesn't mean that's wasted time, because
Yeah.
in 2 years' time, your business may be differently placed. You go back to some of the same partners
Yeah.
or similar, you've gone through the processes, it will go a lot quicker, and you say, right, we're now in a position to hire you to do X for us. But just evaluate the capital costs and the time and effort as well.
I love this one, and of course, if it sounds so simple, like, oh, just evaluate. But the challenge is there are fixed costs and variable costs,
True.
and some of these marketplaces you're going to be investing into in the early days. And this is true for Shopify exercises as well, to build a Shopify site for your standalone brand. A lot of people come to us and we're like, here's all the expenses, and the question is, do they have the appetite to invest? It's almost like farming, Are you willing to, dig holes, clear weeds, shovel manure, and watch your little baby trees that all feel like total expense with no benefit grow into big giant fruit trees that are giving you the fruit that you want? And the question is, how rapidly does that fruit mature, and how long do you have to be in investment mode versus payback mode? Now, I would submit to you that setting up an alternate country in Amazon is probably one of the fastest omni-channel opportunities that could exist, because the system, the economics, the known, that there's no unknown knowns, or no unknown unknowns, or whatever Rumsfeld
One
said.
of those things.
But other channels, like setting up a Walmart or setting up an eBay or a Shopify, you could be investing in that for years before you break even, and you just have to have the stomach for it. But you also have to understand your math and say, okay, if these fixed costs eventually get to this sales velocity and the variable costs remain the same, I'm going to get to a place where I'm starting to extract more and more value the more my sales velocity grows on these platforms. So I think this is the nuance here in this step 7. It's a little bit of go take a math class and kind of a strategic thinking class, and really ponder, how could it work if I moved 5,000 units on Walmart or 5,000 units in Amazon Germany, and think through that. Yeah.
To your point, yes, strategy and financial literacy are absolutely critical. And when it comes to international expansion, again, it's a symptom, not a cause, really. If your business is a mess, then you shouldn't be expanding internationally. You should sort that out. And it's easy to say, and it's easy to run in a day-to-day reactive capacity. I mean, I tend towards that. And so I'm not criticizing anyone, but yeah, very good point. And the other thing I would say, to your point, it's absolutely the payoff versus investment thing. I would say, from my experience of private label product development, it's a little bit different for the wholesalers and resellers, of course, is that you're probably going to be putting money in for at least 12 months for a new product line. Whereas with international expansion, maybe it takes you 6 months to get VAT registered in Germany because they've got a backlog. But you're not going to be paying out money constantly during that time in the way that you do with new product development and, putting a ton of money down for capital of the inventory. It's going to be maybe a one-off cost and then some ongoing compliance costs. Maybe it's $200 a month, maybe it's 2,000, whatever it is. And it's not going to be as big or as nasty in my experience as product development costs. So again, when you're weighing the opportunity up, that might be pushing you towards keeping the product offering the same, but expanding internationally, because to your point, the payback time might be a lot quicker. So, and the cash flow characteristics could actually improve once you've done it. But you've got to think it through. You're absolutely right.
I love it. And the reason I think that's so valuable is because some of us get to the point where we have these business milestones we achieve, where if we're fortunate to in the e-commerce space to say, oh, I'm paying my own, lifestyle. I'm full-time now with my business. Oh, I'm full-time plus I've hired some people I needed. And then you reach another milestone and then you're like, well, I've got surplus money. And what do I do with this? Do I just take it and put it in my retirement account or to make it work for me in my business? And so the investment into your business and other alternate sales channels is an obvious place to consider that will help you expand in the future. Okay, I love this. So what's step number 8?
So step number 8 is really recognizing that despite all the planning we'll have done, and you will need to do some planning and some spreadsheets, I'm afraid, you're not going to get it right because nobody has a crystal ball. So the main thing is to recognize that up front and plan to do a market test, or what I'd call a minimum viable launch. Now, minimal viable doesn't mean small necessarily, so make sure you've got the money for it, but you got to evaluate the demand, add on, so how many units are you going to need for starters? And once you've taken care of tax, freight, compliance, whatever, add on some units needed for launch as well, and then plan a launch budget, including PPC. And this is where, to your point, Jason, that if you've done a launch in the USA Amazon or UK Amazon, then doing it the other way around is going to be very similar mechanics, and the back-end systems work in a similar way. The costs may be different in scale. So the cost per click in the US are probably going to be higher than anywhere else, etc. But then the main thing is do that test launch. And don't stress about going out of stock either. If it's a test launch, the main thing is to see, can I get to the point where I sell a certain number of units at a certain price? And therefore, once I scale that forwards and do it at scale, what profit per unit can I expect? And is this worth the effort? So that's why you're doing it. So don't stress out about, oh, I've gone out of stock. Yes, well, that's good because you only put 1,000 units into something you thought could handle 5,000 units for every 3 months. And you were right. That's good. Go back, order 5,000 units and then launch properly. But a test launch is an exercise of humility of knowing you do not have the ability to predict the future. So do your homework, but then go and test it and see if you were right.
So then it begs the question of what we just talked about before, which is for that test launch, what time duration do you put on that to say to yourself, this is a worthy amount of time that I really understand what's happening? What would you give it in terms of duration?
That's kind of how long is a piece of string question. I guess that I wouldn't make it too short. Put it this way: if you're if you're not serious, you shouldn't do it anyway because it's going to be work and risk, right? So the first, to your point, and if you're thinking this could be producing a future stream of income for years, don't undercook it. Maybe you allow 3 months, maybe it's 6. It just
okay,
I
but
don't know.
let me challenge your thinking. Wouldn't you want to get through like any kind of big holiday sales thing? Like, I mean, if you're in European marketplaces, do they have a Christmas time Q4 push just like in the US? Is a big,
100%,
Black Friday, Cyber Monday exists beyond just the US,
so if you're talking about the timing, as in which part of the season to launch in, then I would definitely avoid Q4, because if you're coming from nowhere and everyone's spending like crazy on PPC and ranking really hard because they're selling very quickly, it's going to be hard to make a dent. So if that's the question, that's a simpler one to answer. I would launch anywhere outside Q4 or whatever the equivalent. In gardening, for example, I know that February, March, April is a big time. So launch outside of peak season, really.
So, but to my point, the duration of your test needs to comprehend the peak and the valley potentially of a seasonality.
Really market Yes, you'd have to
Yeah,
have a 12-month launch, wouldn't you?
yeah,
Because
yeah,
you'd need to get you need to get seasonal data. I suppose I'm talking about a smaller launch than that. And I suppose that in which case, yeah, okay, you got to account for seasonality, which is really hard to do, and there's a lot of variability chucked into the equation by COVID right now. So, to your point, I guess that this isn't a highly scientific test. I'm not saying you should ramp up from, a 3-month test where you put 300 units into ordering 30,000 units. I mean, I guess take it in stages is maybe an in between thing. I'm more in
yeah,
favor of iterative answers to things rather than planned answers, if you see what I mean. Because I don't think necessarily, but I would say try 3 months. If that works, put what you
yeah,
think is 6 months worth of stock. If you keep going out of stock, then go, okay, let's ramp this up.
yeah,
Let's even maybe get some investment partners or debt or whatever's appropriate once you've got something proven
yeah.
and really ramp it up. But I would take it in stages, I suppose, to put it simplistically.
Okay, what's step 9?
Step 9 is evaluate. That's really, really important. You made your plan, then you've done a test launch. There's no point in doing a test unless you evaluate the numbers and also the stress level. You've got to be the evaluation for this sort of stuff isn't just about money because some people stress out about things being out. It's a sort of mental thing that's outside of their country. They stress about their inventory being more under risk somehow, or dealing with different languages or different cultures. Some people are fine with that, but stressed out about inventory, I'm more like that. So, mostly it's a financial decision, but it's also about focus and mental focus and stress. And you just got to evaluate, is the game worth the candle? Did we make extra profit or if it's just a test launch, do our figures tell us that once we scale this up, we should be able to do this profitably? And to the point you were making, a 3-month launch or whatever it is not really long enough to thoroughly answer that question, but it gives you a good some evidence in that direction. And so I guess that the next thing is really step 10, which is double down, but don't like quadruple down. So,
Yeah,
maybe, add more inventory, but don't abandon your beloved, primary market that's up and proven and running.
yeah,
And troubleshooting the issues, find new partners if you discover that there was some box you didn't tick for some country, or maybe change partners if one of them turned out not to be
hmm,
that good.
yeah,
And then budget for the next phase of expansion and allocate the resources. And make sure, by the
hmm,
way, it sounds so simple, but don't double allocate the resources. You can't use the same money twice to expand your product lines in America and then also expand into Japan.
yeah,
If you've allocated it for one resource, make sure you've got some way of showing that in the system for
yeah.
yourself and for your team as well.
I love this phrase you had in the show notes, which is double down or delete. And
Yeah.
that's really the heart of the challenge, isn't it? Because what will most likely happen is you won't hit a grand slam home run, to use American baseball terms, but you won't also have a massive implosion or failure. You'll have some result that's somewhere in the middle, and that's the hardest, type of result to evaluate, which is like,
True.
is this working? Kind of. Well, do you kill it? I don't know. And so that's the hardest thing to really think through. How do you double down or delete in that context? And to your prior point about evaluating, I think that the thing to think through at this stage is probably to the old Chinese proverb I heard once is, before you begin any game, understand the rules and
Hmm.
how long you're going to play. And or something like that. I don't know. That's really the phrase, but that's how I remember the phrase. But understand the rules and how long you're going to play before you start, because you've got to create your own evaluation criteria. And if you don't do that, you'll do it. Your stomach will do it for you eventually. Your intuition will kick in and be like, I don't know if this is worth it. Well, why don't you know? Because we didn't ever think about whether or not to evaluate it. But at
Yeah.
some point, the truth will come up from within you, and you'll say, "This doesn't seem right anymore." But those are the hardest things to decide upon, because maybe you're just needing to wait for
By the
the
way,
ugly duckling to turn into the golden goose.
I to this point, it's this strategic slash thinking self-management point, which is really fascinating. I'm glad you brought it up. There's a great book called The Dip by Seth Godin. He's always a good thinker, and one of the lovely things I've experienced about his thinking is the older he gets, the more content he produces. I think the more profound his insights are, which is not common. Most people just recycle the same thing for 20 years. Um, and the dip is really interesting. It's about strategic quitting. He says at the beginning of the book, I think we've met, I don't know if we've done a podcast about it. He says, winners quit early and winners quit often. But the key is to plan whether you're going to quit, because if you just follow your gut, it may be, and if you've got a refined, entrepreneur's intuition, as you have probably, Jason, after, over a decade in the business, maybe your gut's telling you a truth, but it can be that it's your fear speaking. And if you
Yeah.
haven't made a plan for what are our objective criteria going and how much money will we spend
Yeah.
before we shut this down, how much time are we going to give it?
Yeah.
To your question of should it be 3 months? I don't know. Each individual business owner has to decide, but you should put a number down,
Yeah.
a time and a budget limit. And if
Yeah.
you say, okay, we tried to expand into Germany, we spent $100,000 in a year, are we going to shut it down at that point?
Yeah.
You should decide before you go into the test phase, before you even launch the thing, where do you cut it off? And
Yeah.
I think an objective decision in advance doesn't mean you can't nuance it when you're there, but I think that helps guard against you being
Yeah.
driven by fear. Because at some point it is going to be a lot of hassle and you're going to hate it, because that's just reality of certain things. Deal with tax authorities and freight. They're not fun things.
Yeah.
Profit is fun. You know.
I need to read that book. I love Seth Godin, but I'm pretty sure I disagree. I would frame it this way. I think winners are brutally honest and pivot relentlessly to solve what's not working. And maybe that's called quitting. I don't know. But I think if you think of people who are trying to do really complicated things, Thomas Edison with a light bulb, or Elon Musk with landing a spaceship or a rocket on a pad in the middle of the ocean successfully, they're brutally honest and have a system in their mind of iteration that allows them to go from this is horribly not work, this is working horribly, or this is not working, to what to change to, how to make the change, and how that rapid iteration, that maybe that's the quitting the one way and trying a different way, maybe, to use Seth's dip idea. But I think that's what I see people do. And other people who are less successful, in my view, are willing or more comfortable ignoring problems and kind of being like, I just, I'm going to set that over on the side here and not think about it. Whereas super successful people are like, I'm going to take that apart and I'm going to make that thing work. And I'm just going to keep grinding until I figure out why it's not working and whether it can work. And really, I hate the idea of people quitting on stuff too soon.
Yeah, well,
So,
maybe the nuance there is the word quit may mean different things to different people. Pivot is maybe, if you read the book, I mean, it's worth reading. I mean, like, you can evaluate for yourself, and you may disagree, and perfectly rightly so. But I think, pivoting is one way of looking at it. The other thing is, I'm not suggesting you just throw in the towel just because it's a little bit harder and takes longer than you think and costs more than you thought, because that's just normal for any new project, frankly, isn't it? It's more a question of not being bloody minded and just keeping going for hours and decades, when you should take the hint that Germany isn't for your product, or Japan. Certain products resonate in certain marketplaces, and sometimes the marketplace will give you the feedback. And as you said, if your gut's telling you this isn't working, that doesn't mean you should give up an international expansion. It just may mean that product in that marketplace isn't the thing. But you should maybe try the same products in a different marketplace and pivot. So to that point, in the end, it comes to the same kind of things, really.
Wow, this is just fantastic, man. This is probably going to be 2 episodes in our podcast. Before we wrap up, I want to just ask you to do two things. One is to do a recap of the 10 steps, but also we usually have a set of resources in our show notes. And I've just noticed that your set of resources, you should just rattle them off to everybody.
Yes, I think
as we talk it through. Just give us a overview of you've got like 7 or 8 bullet points here of resources. You want to do those and then do a summary and we can wrap up?
Perfect. Yes. So our friend Kevin Sanderson is very good on international expansion, and he's US based, but he sells pretty much everywhere that there is an Amazon marketplace, as far as I can tell. Certainly the usual ones. So he's worth following. He's got a nice knack of keeping things fairly simple. He's very positive, to your point, that he tries to see opportunity more than problem. So he's very positive, typically upbeat US kind of guide for that. It sounds like Kyle Hamer is your business partner in the advisory stuff, who I know well, is the man to talk to about US based sellers selling into Japan, which is an excellent opportunity to explore for everyone. Doesn't mean it will be for you, but explore at least. John Kant of Rising Sun Commerce, my friend over in the UK, deals with a lot of UK and US sellers expanding to Japan, and he lived out there, and his wife's Japanese, so he's got a very thorough grasp of the culture, what will work there, what won't. Couple of other resources. If you're selling in multiple Amazon marketplaces and keeping track of the analytics, including stock control, which can be a nightmare, as I said, eva.guru is a very good resource for that. It's a pretty affordable and very powerful artificial intelligence system. Simply VAT, if you're wanting to sell in the EU, if you're UK based, or US sellers selling in the EU or UK, they really are very, very good at this stuff. We've tried multiple different partners for VAT, and these guys deliver very consistently. YLT translations from Jana Klekic. I deal with lots of different marketplaces, different translating, and they're very sophisticated about that side.
And
And
that's
two final things.
sorry,
Oh, sorry.
that's the letter Y, the letter L, and the letter T.
Exactly right.
YLT
YLT.
translations. Okay.
Exactly right. Yeah. They're not
Yep.
the cheapest, but they're very, very good. So if you're serious, then they will do a good job for you.
Yep.
And I would argue you shouldn't go into a marketplace that isn't a serious looking opportunity anyway. I think you're wasting your time, as we've talked earlier. Two final things, just mentioning the off Amazon expansion possibilities. Paul Sonnefeld, who's based in Australia, of Merchant Spring, they deal with analytics tracking across multiple different channels, including Amazon and off Amazon. And then Chris Scrimgeour of Payoneer, based in the UK, is very good for coming up with ideas for multiple international markets outside Amazon, which is going quite a lot beyond the sort of scope of what we talked about today. But if you're super ambitious, you may end up being multi channels in lots of different areas of the world, and there are many opportunities out there as well.
Love it. So we'll have all those references in the show notes again on the ecommerceleader.com. If you want to go and just click through, but you can obviously Google all that stuff. But to catch the specifics, check out our show notes for this episode. Okay, you want to give us a summary of your 10 steps and maybe just the top level reason why international expansion is a great idea for people, and we can wrap it up from there.
Sure. So the 10 steps first. So step one, tie it into your bigger goals. Make sure that if you've got profit goals, medium term, or you wanted to exit in the medium and longer term, that it makes sense to add international expansion. There's got to be more upside than downside, simply put. Second one is consider some of the alternative uses of your cash and your time and your team's sort of mental focus, which is new product lines versus new sales channels. Those are the classic expansion plays. Sometimes you should choose one or the other. And to your point, Jason, one channel at a time, I think, or one product at a time broadly, unless you're really good at mass launching products. I only know a few people I trust with that. Number three, evaluate the size of the opportunity. Probably start with the biggest markets. USA is an obvious one if you're not selling there. Germany, UK, Japan are obvious ones as well in terms of decent sized markets. And Germany and Japan are probably, for my money, more likely to be good opportunities just because it's more of a barrier to entry. Step four, pick your fight, i.e. choose one market at a time to expand into. Step five, evaluate the barriers to entry. They're probably going to be tax, freight, translation, and localization, and a little bit of customer service. Frankly, you can probably get away with Google Translate to start with there, and maybe legal entity things. You should probably talk to a lawyer. My suspicion is you can probably keep that simpler than you think anyway. Number six, contact or find partners to take care of the things like that. Number seven, check your resources against requirements, not just money, although that's obviously critical, but your mental bandwidth. Number eight, do a market test or a minimal viable launch. How long should that be? Maybe it's 3 months, maybe it's 6 months, but make a plan and stick with it. Number nine, evaluate the test launch, finances, but also mental stress levels. And number 10, double down or delete. If it's worth going into, go down into it properly. If it isn't, make a proper decision and just shut the thing down so it's not floating around, absorbing time and energy when it's not producing an upside for you.
Terrific list, man. Wonderful conversation today, and I really, really appreciate your points of view on this. It's fun to do this conversation with you there based in England, and for the US listeners to be able to check it out. In our statistics, most the audience is either US or UK. I mean, that's like 90% or whatever, or either one or the other. So we kind of get this dual listenership. And so it's fun to have this type of conversation be across the pond, I guess, as they say. So thank you again for sharing your wisdom and insights on this one. Thank you for listening with us. For those of you who are watching live, really, really appreciate the opportunity to serve you. It really is an honor. I'll just make one final call to action, and that is, if you have not checked out our 4-person conversation that's occurring now every week on the Call-In app, you can check out the E-commerce Leader Call-In show on the Call-In app. We just did a hot topic on Tuesday, which was using debt to fuel your growth. Hot takes, yes or no, our perspectives, what we've seen, what we've done. And so you'll want to go check that out and go from there. So thanks, Michael, as always, for a wonderful conversation.
Thanks, man. Always an honor to talk it through with somebody with your insights and experience.
Yep. All right, everybody. Thanks so much. Okay, that's our podcast. Cool. Thanks everybody watching live with us. We're going to wrap it up here, but as always, feel free to hit us up if you want to chat about anything we can do to help you and be of service to you in your business. If you've got interest in this area, I would just encourage you to just hit Michael up and connect with him through what's the best website, amazingfba.com. Is that the best
AmazingFBA.com.
contact
Yeah,
form?
you can pop
Okay.
me a PM or come onto
Yeah.
the Facebook group and just ask questions at the Amazing FBA Facebook group as well.
Yeah, and I would just encourage anybody in our community that's selling in the Amazon US market that wants to get into the Germany, space or EU or whatever the European context is. Michael would be your guy. I mean, just connect with him and he can get you going in the right direction. So
yeah, happy to help. Yeah,
awesome. All right, buddy. Good times. I'm going to end the live broadcast here, and then we'll go from there. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.